The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming from the nation's capital and are a public service of your television provider. C-SPAN, created by cable.
Now, Mr. President, I've stood on this floor dozens of times talking about this subject. Now, often I come down to tell the story of the voices of the victims of these gun homicides, of these mass shootings, just to make sure that everybody here knows who these people are. They're real people with families. And so this isn't new to me, but I'm at my wit's end. I've had enough. I've had enough of the ongoing slaughter of innocents, and I've had enough of inaction in this body. Every shooting is different. There's a different set of facts around every single shooting. The story in Newtown was of a deeply mentally ill individual who had been isolated in school and in his neighborhood. There's a story of a young man who had a fascination with violent content and violent video games. There was a story of a young man who had access to a very powerful weapon that was able to shoot 20 kids and kill all 20. And this shooting in Orlando has a different set of facts as well. There's clearly a terrorist connection here. There is a story of radicalization. It's also a story about a very ill, very confused young man. There's a story of access, again, to a very powerful weapon. There's a story here of interaction with the FBI, of holes in a network of surveillance and checks that we need to discuss. Every set of facts is different. But what unites all of these shootings, from Littleton to Aurora to Newtown to Blacksburg to Orlando, is that the weapon of choice in every case is a gun, often a very powerful gun, an AR-15 or AR-15 style gun that was designed for the military, for law enforcement, to kill as many people as quickly as possible. And so, Mr. President, I'm prepared to stand on this floor and talk about the need for this body to come together on keeping terrorists away from getting guns through those two measures for, frankly, as long as I can, because I know that we can come together on this issue. And I know that there's other really important business to be done here. I know other people have amendments that they'd like to call up. I know that there are other issues that senators would like to raise. But having come through the experience of Newtown, I've had enough. It's been 4 years, and nothing has been done, despite the fact that 90% of the American public wants us to act. The vast majority of gun owners want us to expand the reach of background checks. Polls suggest that 80% of Americans believe that people on the terrorist watch list shouldn't be able to buy guns. There's no controversy out there about these two provisions. We can work it out. We can work it out today.
The senator from Connecticut, my colleague and friend, went through the unforgettable lists of mass shootings in Newtown, 20 school children and 6 employees killed. Santa Monica, 5 Americans killed. In Washington, D.C., here at the Naval Yard, 12 people killed. In Fort Hood, 3 people killed. Isla Vista, California, 6 people killed. Marysville, Washington, 4 people killed in a high school cafeteria. Charleston, South Carolina, 9 people at a church killed. Chattanooga, Tennessee, at a military recruiting office, 4 Marines and a naval petty officer killed. Roseburg, Oregon, 10 people killed at a local community college. Colorado Springs, Colorado, 3 people killed at a Planned Parenthood clinic. In San Bernardino, in an act of terrorism, 14 people killed. In Orlando, this past weekend, this Saturday night, 49 innocent people murdered, killed. And so I rise to ask Senator Murphy a question, because there is a question on the hearts and minds of the majority of the people of our nation. They're asking the question, how long will this go on? They're asking the question, how can we be a nation so mighty and great, yet hold this distinction on the planet Earth where these kind of mass killings go on at a rate, at a level nowhere else seen on the planet Earth? It is here in this country, founded on the idea that we formed this government for our common defense, that we formed this government to ensure domestic tranquility, that we formed this government based on the idea that we can make for a safer, stronger, and more prosperous land. That question is being asked from coast to coast, from north to south. And Senator Murphy and I talked yesterday about coming to the floor today and not letting business as usual happen. So we talked with our other colleagues who will come to this floor today, who all have in their hearts that word enough, enough, enough. What we are seeking is not radical. What we're seeking is not something that is partisan. What we're seeking is common sense that is supported by the overwhelming majority of this nation. Study after study, poll after poll, survey after survey of gun owners, of people who have weapons, who take to heart their Second Amendment rights. When you ask them, what should we do? Do you support closing the terrorist loophole, creating practical, common sense bars for people that are suspected of terrorism from buying a gun? 82% of gun owners say, yes, we should do that. They say enough.
And Mr.
Yield to the
President,
gentleman for an additional question.
thank you. And those of us that are listening to us, if they are concerned about this stilted parliamentary language that we're using, it's the Senate's rules that I am requesting through the President of the Senate permission to ask a question. So I will ask this in the form of a question. Would the senator believe that these are the shoes of one of the trauma surgeons? It just so happened that 2 blocks from the nightclub is the trauma center in Orlando Regional Medical Center, #1 trauma center with trained trauma surgeons. They called them all in the middle of the night. And would the senator like me to read what the doctor who owns these shoes said?
First of all, let me say it doesn't surprise me because we know the level of carnage that entered that emergency room, but I think it should pain everyone to look at that pair of shoes, look at the blood splattered on it, think of the amount of blood that was lost by those who died and lived, and to think that we are not going to do anything about it. I'd yield for an additional question. I know the senator from New York is waiting as well.
And since the senator would like to know what Dr. Joshua Corsa, medical doctor who owns these shoes, said as he wrote in one of the Orlando publications, "These are my work shoes from Saturday night. They are brand new, not even a week old. I came to work this morning and saw these in the corner of the call room next to the pile of dirty scrubs. I had forgotten about them until now. On these shoes, soaked between the fibers, is the blood of 54 innocent human beings. I don't know which were straight, which were gay, which were black, or which were Hispanic. What I do know is that they came to us in wave after wave of suffering, screaming, and death. And somehow, in that chaos, doctors, nurses, technicians, police, paramedics, and others performed superhuman feats of compassion and care. This blood, which poured out of these patients and soaked through my scrubs and my shoes, will stain me forever. In these Rorschach patterns of red, I will forever see their faces and the faces of those that gave everything they had in those dark hours. There's still an enormous amount of work to be done. Some of the work will never end. And while I work, I will continue to wear these shoes. And when the last patient leaves our hospital, I will take them off. I will keep them in my office. I want to see them in front of me every time I go to work. For on June 12, after the worst of humanity reared its evil head, I saw the best of humanity come fighting right back. I never want to forget that night. Dr. Joshua Corsa, Orlando Regional Medical Center. I thank the senator for yielding.
Mr. President. I'd yield to the gentleman from New York for a question without losing my right to the floor. I yield to the senator from West Virginia for a question without losing my right to the floor.
Let me first of all thank all of our colleagues and all of our senators for being here today and speaking about this most important issue for the welfare of our citizens in each one of our respective states. My question is going to be to the senator from Connecticut, is on gun culture. I don't think there's another state, if there is, I don't know, that has more of a gun culture than West Virginia. We take that extremely serious, the Second Amendment rights. But I want to make sure that we're on the same page here, because some people come from states that don't have much of a gun culture or weren't exposed to guns as a young person growing up. I can tell you in West Virginia, I would ask, the question would be to my colleague in Connecticut. At a very young age, we're taught, first of all, how to handle guns safely. We're taught, basically, you never sell your gun to a stranger. You never sell your gun to someone who has a criminal background. You never sell your gun to someone who's mentally unstable. You don't even give your gun to a family member or a friend if you don't think they're responsible. This is how we're taught in a gun culture. And I'm sure Connecticut has the same gun cultures that we have. So how this all came about with the amendment 3 years ago after the horrible, horrific tragedy in Newtown was that if we respect a law-abiding gun owner who doesn't own a gun or didn't buy the gun because they want to do something wrong or they're a criminal or assumed to be a criminal just because they own it, then you have to assume that they're law-abiding and they're going to do the right thing. If they're going to do the right thing is we don't sell to strangers. We don't sell to criminals. We don't sell to mentally unstable people. So doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it make sense if, and same as in Connecticut, if you go to a gun show that would allow somebody not to go through that, but go to a table where there's not a licensed dealer selling it and doesn't require by law to have a background check, that's saying, whoa, wait a minute. You can't do that. This is a commercial transaction, and as a law-abiding gun owner, I don't do that. I got to know who you are. I don't know you. You want to buy my gun, or I want to sell you my gun. I'm not going to do it till I know you're capable and able of having that gun and respectful of it and understand how to operate it. That's what we said, but we did so much more. So I would say to my good friend in Connecticut, senator from Connecticut, is the gun culture the same? I mean, you come from a state that has a gun culture. And even those wonderful, wonderful families who tragic loss of their children, they weren't trying to ban anything. They wanted a common sense. So is the gun culture similar to ours? We treat people as law-abiding gun owners. They'll do the right thing. And the right thing is to find out who wants to buy your gun. And don't let them go to a gun show or on the internet and be able to skew around that.
I think that, and I'd be interested.
I woke up on Sunday morning still in the glow of the Boston Pride Parade. Boy, that ended fast. But I thought about the history of Pride. In the 1960s, the mere act of publicly associating with the LGBT community was considered radical. That was true even in places where the community came together to seek strength and protection, like New York's Greenwich Village. Greenwich Village's Stonewall Inn was one of the most popular gay bars in New York, and it was regularly raided by police officers who arrested patrons for any number of bureaucratic violations, obviously designed to harass, embarrass, and abuse people whose only crime was to want a place to be together. And one night, in late June of 1969, the bar's patrons fought back. The rioting continued intermittently for 5 nights, and it wasn't pretty. It reflected the demands of a group for equality, for the same chances that other Americans have to be themselves. A few months after that, LGBT activists began planning for the first Pride March. It was set for the following June to commemorate the Stonewall Uprising. The idea was to use that anniversary as an opportunity for the community to remind us all that they too are citizens. They too get to have some fun, and they too are entitled to the same dignity and respect as every other American. Over the years, the tradition expanded across this great nation, just as tolerance and acceptance expanded across this great nation. Pride both helped us move forward and showed us how far we have moved together. And when terrible things like the Orlando shooting happen, we face important choices as a country, as individuals, and as a community. When terrible things happen, we have to choose how we respond to them. And all of us will decide whether we are going to come together or splinter apart. We can become a country that is defined by fear and hate, fear of each other, hatred for anyone who is different from ourselves. In the America of fear and hate, we will alienate and isolate entire communities, creating even more fear and hate and threatening further violence. We will fracture as a people, splintering off into separate groups, each fearing others, each seeking to serve only themselves. Or we can make the choice to come together. We can choose that no community of immigrants, no community of Muslims, no community of young men is isolated in this country. We can do this knowing that when we embrace each other and build one people out of many, we become a stronger country. Stronger because of the bonds of community prevent alienation. Stronger because the bonds of community make it harder to turn against each other and break us apart. Stronger because the bonds of community mean people can get help before it's too late. We cannot ignore the fact that this massacre targeted an LGBT club, and we should learn from that and from the message of pride. In Orlando, an act of terrorism was also an act of hate, visited upon people who came together in friendship and celebration. But the patriots at Stonewall showed us the way. They gave birth to a movement that changed a nation. They beat back hate. They showed us that change is possible. Change for the better is possible. They showed everyone that love can triumph over fear and hate, that we can all come together. But boy, they showed us you've got to work for it. This is not an abstract idea. When it comes to our response to the tragedy in Orlando, we are already beginning to see the splintering of America. One side shouts, "It was a gun that killed all those people." The other side shouts, "It wasn't a gun, it was a terrorist that killed all those people." And through all of the shouting, we miss what should be obvious. It was a terrorist with a gun that killed all those people. A terrorist with hate in his heart and a gun in his hand that killed all those people. It is time for us to acknowledge all of these truths and to come together to address them. First, we must take the threat of terrorism seriously. We must continue to stop the flow of money to terrorist groups and to work with our allies to stop the movement of terrorists and disrupt hubs of radicalization abroad. And here at home, we need to make sure that our law enforcement agencies have the resources they need, funding, training, equipment. But we also need to make sure we have the resources to analyze and counter radical propaganda. The war on terror is now fought online, and we need to put our best forces online to fight back. We need to work with people in our local communities, not isolate or demonize them, to stop radicalization before it starts and to prevent tragedies before they occur, and to show that nobody is kept out of the American family because of how they look or talk or pray. Second, we must take the threat from guns seriously. Our nation is awash in the weapons of murder, and there are many things we can do to address that. We can ban Rambo-style assault weapons. We can take these weapons of war off our streets. We can also close the terror gap. The FBI should have the authority to block gun sales to anyone they believe is a terrorist. If someone cannot get on an airplane because the FBI is concerned they might be plotting to do harm against Americans, then they shouldn't be able to walk into a store and buy a Rambo-style assault weapon. We believe we can close the background checks loophole. Anyone who cannot buy a gun because of a felony conviction or a mental illness should not be able to go to a gun show or go online and buy that same gun. We can act to make the next shooting less likely. We can act to reduce the likelihood that a disturbed individual, a criminal or a terrorist, is again able to kill dozens with a gun. And if we fail to act, the next time someone uses a gun to kill one of us, a gun that we could have kept out of the hands of a terrorist, then members of this Congress will have blood on our hands. But the truth is, this is not just about Congress. It is about all of us. We all have choices. We have choices about how we're going to treat our neighbors and our fellow citizens. Choices about what we do when someone is targeted at a coffee shop because of their background or their looks or their race. Choices about how we react when a friend or a coworker, a son or a daughter tells us the truth about who they love. Choices about how we treat our neighbors and fellow citizens who don't look or talk or pray like we do. It is a scary world out there. We all know that. Terrorism mutates into new and more dangerous forms. Terrorists have easy access to assault weapons that put us all at risk. And hate, plain, old-fashioned, naked, ugly hate, still lurks in dark corners. It is a scary world, but America is strongest when we work together, and all of us will decide whether we come together or splinter apart. We can keep weapons out of those who would do us harm. We can make it harder for terrorism to take root in this country. We can drive the forces of hate out of our nation. We can build a stronger, more united America. And we can begin right here in the United States Senate. We can begin right now. And with that, my question for the senator from Connecticut is this. Do you believe it is time for the Senate to act in the interests of the American people and finally pass these common sense, widely supported proposals to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people?
I think, Mr. President, I want to close by telling a story that I told during my first speech on the floor of the United States Senate. I want to introduce you to Dylan Christopher Jack Hockley. who in this picture is age 6. According to just about everybody who knew him, it was impossible not to fall in love with Dylan Hockley if you met him. He loved video games, he loved jumping on the trampoline, watching movies, he loved munching garlic bread, he had dimples, he had blue eyes, he had this really mischievous little grin. You can see it here wearing one of his favorite shirts. His beaming smile, it would light up almost any room that he was in. He loved to cuddle. He loved to play tag every single morning at the bus stop with the neighbors. He liked to watch movies. He loved the colored purple. He loved seeing the moon. And he loved eating his favorite foods, especially chocolate. He was so proud that he was learning how to read, and he'd bring a new book every day home. He most importantly adored his big brother Jake, who was his best friend and his role model. Dylan's mom, Nicole, who has been a champion in the cause of ending gun violence in this country, always thought that Dylan was, in her words, quote, a bit special, a bit different. She said that he was late to develop speech. He was late to learn how to crawl. There was always a little something about him. You couldn't put your finger on it, she said. He liked bland foods. He only wanted plain spaghetti. He had a habit of flapping his arms when he got excited. He would put his hands over his ears when he heard loud noises. He was diagnosed with autism. But as his father points out, autism is a spectrum, and it has many different facets to him. Dylan loved repetition, and he'd watch his favorite movies over and over and over again, the Gruffalo, Wall-E, and he'd find a particular portion of that movie that he loved, and he'd watch that portion. He'd rewind, he'd watch it, he'd rewind, and he'd watch it. His laugh when he watched those favorite portions was infectious. Dylan was struggling with autism as a student at Sandy Hook Elementary School. But he was a special, special boy who is going to turn into a special, special young man. He idolized his brother Jake, but he idolized someone else as well. He idolized a woman named Anne Marie Murphy. Anne Marie Murphy was his special education teacher and his personal aide. And over the course of the beginning of his first grade year, they formed a bond, a deep, deep bond that is often hard to form for kids with autism, like Dylan. Their bond was so tight that he had a picture of her on the refrigerator along with his class. And every day when he'd walk by the refrigerator, he would point to the picture and say, "There's my class, and there's Mrs. Murphy." It meant something to him to have that relationship. And he loved going to school in large part because he knew he had someone there who loved him back. As Senator Booker has talked about the expectations that we should have for each other, that expectation of deep, passionate love for each other, Dylan and Anne Marie Murphy had it. Senator Blumenthal and I got to Sandy Hook Elementary School after most of the families had come to realize that their loved ones weren't coming back, that their little boys and girls were probably lying on the floor of those classrooms. And we still saw and heard things that I think we both wish we didn't hear and see. But when Nicole Hockley was standing in or outside the firehouse, when she came to the slow, awful, crippling realization that her little boy was not coming back, she had a moment where she thought to herself, maybe Anne Marie will come back and she'll tell me what happened to my little boy. And then she had a second thought, that Anne Marie probably wouldn't leave Dylan if he was in danger. When Adam Lanza walked into that classroom and aimed his military-style assault weapon with clips attached to it holding 30 bullets, Anne Marie Murphy probably had a chance to run or to hide or to panic. And instead, Anne Marie Murphy made the most courageous decision that any of us could imagine. Instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of panicking, Anne Marie Murphy found Dylan Hockley and embraced him. You know why we know that? Because when the police entered the classroom, that's how they found Dylan Hockley, dead, wrapped in the embrace of Anne Marie Murphy. It doesn't take courage to stand here on the floor of the United States Senate for 2 hours or 6 hours or 14 hours. It doesn't take courage to stand up to the gun lobby when 90% of your constituents want change to happen. It takes courage to look into the eye of a shooter and instead of running, wrapping your arms around a 6-year-old boy and accepting death as a trade for just a tiny little itty-bitty piece of increased peace of mind for a little boy under your charge. And so this has been a day of questions. And so I ask you all this question. If Anne Marie Murphy could do that, then ask yourself, what can you do to make sure that Orlando or Sandy Hook never, ever happens again? With deep gratitude to all of those who have endured this very, very late night, I yield the floor.